Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book that I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist Bookstore, or you can subscribe to me here. I'm going to be discussing the Great Awakening briefly from a world history perspective today. Now, don't expect you to agree with everything I say or anything I say, but I just hope that you'll learn about some of the topics and people and places and events and concepts I talk about, and then have your own opinion. So we're going to begin because my point of view is from a Bible believer. It doesn't mean I'm a good person. I'm not saying that. It's just saying I believe the Bible. Okay, that's simply what it says. Just take it for what it says, um, and go from there. And then you have your own opinion. So we're going to begin. As a counterstrike from God to Satan's counter-reformation and the Enlightenment and all they represent, we have an event called the, quote, Great Awakening. Some religious historians claim that the event called the Great Awakening was a series of revivals along the eastern seaboard of the American colonies that would one day be called the United States of America. Others believe it was one long revival. The Calvinism of the Anglican Church was in control of the Virginia colony, and the Puritans in the control of Massachusetts Bay were hardly evangelical enough to keep the number of unchurched people from growing rapidly. The assumption that mankind can make no choice for himself and that those who were saved or who were damned was already set in eternity did not spur a great missionary effort toward recently settled colonists. Scattered homesteads in the wilderness made ecclesiastical control difficult, as most of the population was too far from parish authority, something that the state church concept required to survive. In 1679, sermons by Solomon Stoddard of Northampton, Massachusetts, led a series of small revivals to erupt. One of the great preachers of the Great Awakening was Jonathan Edwards, who preached, among others, the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which is probably one of the greatest, most powerful sermons ever preached anywhere by anyone and should be read by all. This sermon, excuse me, first preached in 1741, is free on the internet, available to everyone. Although a Calvinist in his beliefs, Edwards pushed the responsibility for choosing Christ clearly into the individual's hands. Another important figure of the Great Awakening was George Whitefield, friend of John Wesley and Ben Franklin, whose voice was so loud and clear that in his sermons, heard by tens of thousands, people reportedly fell to their knees and begged God to save them over a mile away. Even more than Edwards, he stressed this experience of conversion. He might be considered a moderate Calvinist. He attacked traditional clergy who were often supported by tax money and who often led dead churches with little enthusiasm for Christ or the Bible. And Calvinism is to varying degrees throughout Protestant Christianity in those times. The Anglican Church could be Arminian, it could be Calvinist, Puritans could be Calvinist. There are different levels of Calvinism, different commitments to it. So, it's not all cut and dried. Um, these men and others like them alienated the, quote, old lights of the Puritan and Anglican Church and helped give American Christianity a distinctive emotional side that went beyond the dry formalism of the Reformation churches. Some church historians trace the rise of Unitarianism, a rejection of Christ's deity and his salvation's uniqueness, to the, quote, old lights and the modern charismatic movement to preachers such as Edward and Whitefield. In the South, one of the principal leaders of the Great Awakening was Samuel Davies, a Presbyterian. Another was Samuel Morris, who would read Whitefield's sermons aloud beginning in 1748. Thousands of people were converted to Christianity, and churches were filled to overflowing. Shubal Stearns, a Baptist, was another influence in this revival movement that swept the South, particularly the frontier. One of the results of this movement was the democratization of faith. The established state churches of Virginia and Massachusetts began to fall apart as the church could no longer control the faith of the people. Religion became more and more an independent matter, and this resulted in the birth of many new denominations, so many that it would, for a long time, become impossible for one religion to dominate others in the USA, as in no other country in a church-state setup. With the Enlightenment attacking faith in God and the Great Awakening bringing faith to the people away from the established churches, America began to move in distinctly its own path of religious involvement. The Christian faith of the United States became, for the most part, evangelical and personal, a sort of reformation within the Reformation. In 1735, John Wesley, an Anglican priest, went with his brother Charles to the American colony of Georgia to work for John Oglethorpe, the colony's founder. During his stay in the colony, he was deeply affected by Moravian missionaries and experienced salvation in 1738. Therefore, he became an influential preacher of the gospel, and as an evangelist and founder of Methodism, preached an estimated 40,000 sermons and traveled 250,000 miles. Unlike Edwards and Whitefield, his beliefs tended toward not John Calvin's, but Jacob Arminius, and that he gave mankind more input into his own salvation and also gave him the opportunity to lose it. A classic must-read sermon of Wesley's is The Almost Christian, which, like his other sermons, can be found for free online. This sermon and Edwards' previously mentioned sermon should be read in Christian churches at least once each year, in my opinion. So we're going to discuss something happening in Europe and some things happening in Europe next. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll study world history.